Good evening, everyone. Basically, this is my first interaction with Khaki and people associated with Khaki. And I wish you a very happy Diwali and happy Dhanteras today. On the eve of Vasubaras, that is Govatsa Dwadashi, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj established his naval powers in the Konkan region. Prior to Chhatrapati Shivaji, there were several powers working in this region, or for that matter, along the coastline of India. But none of them thought of having a own naval power on this 7,500 kilometers long stretch of entire India. We have a few of them, like we may say Raja Chola or Pala dynasty, but that was way back. Later on, even Kunjali Marakkar, he did his bit in conquering a part of, he tried to do his part and tried to save his territory. But the intensive work what Chhatrapati Shivaji did for the Konkan is par excellence. Let us begin with our today's evening talk about Kanhoji's Konkan. See, Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre fought the English, Portuguese, and Siddhis on and off the Konkan coast for more than 3 decades. What was the condition at that time? Basically, Konkan, or what we know as coastline today, the area ranging from Vasai to Vengurla, or south of Bombay to north of Goa. This stretch is mainly known as Konkan. This was divided in various dynasties, whether it was Adil Shahi, there was Bijapur Sultanate from Adil Shahi from Bijapur Sultanate. Then some part was ruled by Portuguese, other part was ruled by Vadikar Savants, Khem Savants of Savantwadi and Boslas of Dabhol. This area, this entire Konkan belt, has been associated with trade and interaction with the entire world since ages. Whether it is Dabhol, whether it is in Mahim, Mahikavati, or Ratnagiri, these were very ancient trading ports of the area. But unfortunately, the entire coast was dominated either by Arabs, those are the Abyssinians, or the Portuguese and British. During his lifetime, Chhatrapati Shivaji realized that though this land part is manageable, but the entire western coast or sea line is exposed to the western invaders, and there has to be a check on the western part of the coast. So he established his navy in this area, and which was taken care by Kanhoji Angre in the next generation. In 1756, basically 1729 to 1756 is Kanhoji's time. And Kanhoji, though he was a brown water navy, Kanhoji's navy was a primitive kind of a navy, which didn't have more resources compared to Britishers or Portuguese, which were far superior as far as the shipbuilding, ship construction, and gunpowder was concerned. But with a familiar terrain and region, knowledge of the region, and better communication skills with the local people, Kanhoji could manage to rule this area and free most of the parts, either from Siddhis or Portuguese. In this slide, I have written, there is a dialogue by James Douglas. Our readers would not thank us for a history of Kanhoji Angre's exploit. Each of the 3 great European nations in Indian waters had a shy at him and his family, and each came off second best. I take it as a compliment because Britishers and Portuguese were fighting for naval supremacy in this region, whereas Kanhoji, with his primitive kind of naval powers or ships, were dealing with them in a much better, far superior way. For a comparison, I would give some numbers. Chhatrapati Shivaji and his successor, Angres, on the naval front or on the western front, they single-handedly defeated Britishers and Portuguese in certain conflicts, and in others, they managed to save their territory with a boat capacity of not more than 350 tons. Whereas they were fighting with the people, we were having bigger boats ranging between 450 to 700 ton payload with a better gun power, better arm ammunition, and heavier boats, heavier ships. But due to knowledge of the terrain, due to the knowledge of currents of the region, a better familiarity with the creeks, and with ability of the local people around in Kanhoji's region, he could manage to fight Britishers and Portuguese in this area. This when we talk of Maratha era, or when we talk of Kanhoji and Chhatrapati Shivaji or Maratha era of Konkan, we have to think of the previous generation also. In the last decade of 15th century, Portuguese sea power arrived in the western coast. Generally, when we say that, or it is a general assertion that Britishers ruled India for 150 years, but much prior to Britishers, Portuguese landed in India, and they were the last people to leave India. But as they were limited to Goa and Vasai and Div Daman, they are not taken into consideration, or the nuisance is not, the gravity of nuisance is not felt by most of the Indian people, whereas they were the most vicious people on the western coast. Under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, when Portuguese came to India, it was a different story altogether. Localites, there were ships, there were traders. Prior to Portuguese, there were Arab traders coming in. Then people from Malabar used to trade around. But when Portuguese landed on the western waters and Vasco da Gama landed India, the scene changed a lot. Like I would say, Portuguese, they were a seaworthy nation. They had better ships because they traveled all the way from Portugal to India. Their ships were much better than contemporary Indian ships. And most important part was they were armed with gunpowder, with superior guns, matchlock guns, whether it was cannons. They were much heavily armored than the native and local Indians. And basically, battles or fights or conflicts in pre-Portuguese era were mostly by one-to-one fighting, a man-to-man fight. Whereas when Portuguese landed in India and gunpowder arrived in between, there was a time when from a far distance, Portuguese could attack an Indian ship. They had a faster and heavier ship with minimum 30 to 40 cannons, which were a great threat to any Indian power or any Indian ship at the sea. And Portuguese saw to it that that threat was imposed upon Indian mindset. It was a mind game basically. that they were so brutal at the attack that even after defeating a certain power, they used to simply ransack everything and kill everyone whosoever was captured. That is why there was a severe threat in the local people, to which acted as a boosting power factor for Portuguese power. After Portuguese, other Europeans also landed in India. British were here, British East India Company came, French were here, even Dutch people came. But there was always a tussle of power between European powers just for Indian subcontinent. We were rich in supplies. Like whenever we say, in my English is not that good, but whenever we say that uh, India was much superior, or India was much wealthier country, we must think of the trade of that era. Like during that period, there was a barter economy. Hardly anything was exchanged in cash. So whatever was exchange, sold to other countries or exported, similarly in kind, other goods were imported to India. And what were the goods exported from India? There was rice, cloth, and spices going out from India. And whereas we were importing either copper, silver, horses, and metals. So these were not the perishable goods. These were non-perishable goods, whereas we were exporting perishable goods. So there was an immense profit in having different kind of trade from India, for which there was this naval supremacy war going on between British, French, Dutch, and Portuguese. Apart from these European powers, even local powers were present on the western coast, or on the Indian seaside or Indian coastline. Mughals were present in what do you call? Mughals were present right in the Gujarat region, Kutch region. Siddhi, which was the Abyssinian power, he was present in Murud. Adil Shah of Bijapur, as we know all, the Bijapur region, or Adil Shahi of Bijapur, was present on the entire coastline of Konkan. There was a small pocket of Savants of Savantwadi. This family has been here. This family has been ruling Savantwadi since at least last 15 to 18 generations. There were Bhosles of Kodal and some local powers who were ruling at that time in this region. I'm talking just about Konkan region, right up to Goa itself. In 1656, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj won a battle against Adi Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur. Basically, after the conquest of Aurangzeb in Deccan, Adil Shahi was quite weakened, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj took this as an opportunity, and he went and conquered Kalyan and Bhiwandi. Kalyan is a very old port. Next to Mahim, Kalyan is also a very old trade destination. So Kalyan and Bhiwandi was won by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and he decided to have his base in Konkan, and this gave him a foothold in Konkan region. Basically, we have to think the other way even, that after Chola and Pandyas, no local power had ever thought of building a navy. There were ships, even Siddhis or Aurangzeb, they had their own ships, but they were for the trade purpose. They were not for the battles or fighting purpose or guarding purpose. They were basically for trading purpose. Whereas Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj took a decision to build his own navy. if we go through his documentation, we'll find that in Ajna Patra is a order signed by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, which is readily available, that he has given a list, or he has given a order stating that whatever wood is required, his government or his officer over there has to purchase the wood from the local peasant. It was not that a government official going around and cutting or chopping tree from anybody's field. But in Ajna Patra, it is clearly mentioned that रयतेने लावलेली झाडे वाढावयास अनेक वर्षे लागतात. Like it takes years together to grow a plant. So people have their emotional bonding. So if at all you require a tree, get it cut from the farmer, pay him the compensation, and then only buy the wood. And he decided to build his navy in Kalyan Bhiwandi region. Geographically, if we see, Kalyan and Bhiwandi are close to sea but away from the main seashore. This was the core region, and this was the reason Shivaji Maharaj took a decision to construct his navy in Kalyan Bhiwandi. Because first of all, he had a very good fortification near Kalyan, that was Durgadi. Today also we can see at the entry of Kalyan Creek, there is a fort by the name Durgadi Fort. Basically, the Navy, Maratha Navy, was in a primitive state. So to save it from an attack, from any foreign attack, Maratha Navy required a fortification or a fort where the supplies would be. So in shelter of Durgadi, Shivaji Maharaj people started building their own ships. And at that particular time, Marathas didn't have the expertise of wood joinery technique. They were good at some fishing boats or trolling boats kind of a thing, but they were not good at or very good at fighting ships or fighter ships. So Shivaji Maharaj hired some Portuguese people to do the job. So it was the first outsourcing, we can say. This work went on for almost 2 years as Portuguese realized that these particular ships, in the pretext of having a trade ship, Chhatrapati Shivaji was building his navy, and a Portuguese governor from Goa has written to governor of Vasai that Shivaji has increased his footprint in Kalyan Bhiwandi and Badlapur, that region, and I am told that there are some vessels being made. Better he not enter our waters, because it will create a nuisance for our interest. So in that case, there were some letters, there were some messages passed on to these workers working for Chhatrapati Shivaji, and the and even the church of that time played a vital role in changing the mindset of those people, and they were sent a message that this particular shipbuilding activity, what is going on in the western coast, is not in the interest of their king of Portugal, so they should quit the job. And all of a sudden, one fine day, all these artisans, all these workers, they vanished. But for that matter, the best part was that what a capable leader could do. Whatever artisans were working for shipbuilding, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj had given helping hands or helpers to work under these Portuguese. So these people took over the job and started this shipbuilding next day onwards. There was not a single day break in this activity, because While this work was to start, he already had a speculation that one of these days we will be having a fight or conflict either with Portuguese or with Britishers. And in this case, our work should not stop. So he had sent the uh, best of artisans from his region or his territory, best of carpenters, to work under these Portuguese uh, people as laborers, and they were instructed that they should not disclose their identity as carpenters, but they should work as simple labor. They should not show any sign of being experts in that field, and they should just learn how a ship is to be made. This worked wonders, and in 1.5 years activity, these new men, the Chhatrapati Shivaji's men who were supposed to be the laborers, they learned the entire job, and the shipbuilding was started and it went on very smoothly. Actually, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Navy, or this Swarajya Navy, what is described as, it was a very small kind of, it was a very primitive kind of a navy, even in numbers, even in size. But because these people knew the region very well, because the local people whom Shivaji hired were very familiar with the region, were familiar with the currents of the creeks, they were very familiar with currents of the sea. They were far better seamen than the people arriving from Europe at that time, because they were familiar with the area. Now, Shivaji's navy was not a blue water navy, whether it was Shivaji, whether it was Kanhoji. It was not a blue water navy. They would not travel uh, across the globe or across the sea. This navy was good as a brown water navy. So they could sail just along the coastline. It was not possible for them to cross sea, but along the coast, they could travel very well. And for their protection, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj either conquered, built, or fortified different forts on the western coast. So, in my next slide, we can see Konkan has the most dense fortification along its coastline. If we go through the Konkan region's map, Konkan has average fortification, average 25 kilometer is the average. There is very dense fortification, number of fortification on this coastline. Right from Mumbai, if we see, near Mandwa, there used to be a port by the name Revas. So there was a Manranjan port at Revas. In Awas, there was another fort. Khanderi, there was another fort. In Alibag, there are 3 forts. After that, Korlai. Then onwards, Padmadurg. So on every 20, average of, on an average 25 kilometers, there is a fort. So why there were so many forts on the western coast? Chhatrapati Shivaji knew his limitations. Kanhoji Angre knew his limitations, that their ships or their navy was not able to fight Britishers or Portuguese with their superior gunpowder, superior cannons at open sea. So along with the coastline, they required a fort, which was as a guard factor for these naval ships, which was a guard factor for their supplies. So along the coast, they could keep a vigil that whatever ship sailed out of Bombay port, wherever that ship traveled, whether it was towards Goa or towards Murud Janjira, which were the two enemy states of Swarajya, before the ship went out of the sight from one port, It was in the range of another fort. So there was always a watch on each sea vessel traveling on the coastline. So Chhatrapati Shivaji made it secure that whatever was on the sea was under his surveillance. So these were the best surveillance chain what he could make on the coast. And this landside along coastline was ruled by Kanhoji and his successors. So whichever ship traveled in the sea was under surveillance of Marathas, and if at all there was an attack from the coast, from the seaside, there was always a fort in the backing which could take care of its seamen as well as its subjects. Khanderi, Kulaba, Suvarnadurg, and Vijayadurg were the prominent Maratha naval bases. Instead of gathering all his ships at one point, Chhatrapati Shivaji and later on Kanhoji Angre, during their regime, they divided their naval powers in different forts at a time. So, had it been one place, and if there was an attack at one particular place, the navy was at threat. So they divided it into a different suba. It was known as suba, and there were these four subas: Khanderi, Kolaba, Suvarnadurg, and Vijayadurg, where 25 big galvets, some gurabs, and frigates. In Marathi, they were called Fatemari or frigates. They were placed. But there used to be a subedar. But to each sea fort, there was always a possibility that a person would attack, whether it is British or Portuguese, they would attack these sea forts. There was always a satellite fort near each fort. So Sagargarh, Prabalgarh, Gopalgarh, Ratnadurg near Ratnagiri were the prominent hill forts of Kanhoji. Kanhoji initially was with Tararani of Kolhapur. Later on, his friend Balaji Vishwanath, his childhood friend, he made his mind and he changed his mind and shifted his loyalties to Chhatrapati Shahu of Satara. So there was a treaty between Chhatrapati Shahu of Satara and Kanhoji Angre, in which Kanhoji was awarded a terrain of Konkan with 23 forts and revenue of the region. So what was the point in giving so many forts and revenue of the region to Kanhoji? During that time, when Aurangzeb landed in Deccan, there was a time when there was no central power in existence as such. It was absolutely virtual. Rajaram Maharaj was sitting down south in Jinji. Tararani was ruling on his behalf. And there was no such power that could help Kanhoji or his friends or his subordinates on western coast. During the same period, when he changed his loyalties, there was a time when he could not get assurance from the central power that in case of emergency, in case of a conflict with British or Portuguese or Siddhis, he could get some support from the state or central power of Marathas. So in lieu of that, he was awarded revenue of this region, and to keep his region intact and safe, the charge of these 23 forts was given to Kanhoji. Let us have a look of some of the prominent forts of Konkan. There you can see Khanderi. This is a recent picture. Now you can see a lighthouse in this. Lighthouse is visible and there is a new jetty coming up. Now this port is owned by DGLL, Director General Lighthouses, and ASI. And they are coming up with a nice lighthouse tourism project on this fort. In 1679, Khandeli Island was occupied by the forces of Shivaji Maharaj under supervision of Mainak Bhandari. This was an abandoned island, but geographically speaking and strategically speaking, In 16th and 17th century, whatever ship entered Mumbai harbor had to go through this Khanderi island. It is right in the channel traveling to Mumbai. So Shivaji Maharaj decided to build a fort over there, and there was a conflict of Britishers and Marathas on ownership of this island. So there is a very interesting story of Maratha and British conflict. That is one of the initial conflicts, sea conflicts in the region. You can see this fort, and there is a huge boulder. It's a huge stone around 20 feet high. And if you hit it with any object, it gives a metallic sound. One can see Khanderi fortification in this site. As we all know, construction of Khanderi was not so easy. There was a constant fight going on. There was a fierce battle to stop construction. And Britishers knew the threat to their power if Maratha existence was there. So some of the British ships landed at the sea, and they threatened local people, those Marathas constructing the fort, that this fort belongs, this island belongs to Britishers, and they should not enter into any activity that challenges the supremacy of Britishers over these waters. To which Mainak Bhandari replied that I won't take any orders from any of the Britishers, and he was ordered by Shivaji to construct a fort. So there were some British ships with cannons and bombing on the fortification, to which Shivaji Maharaj sent 2 cannons, and they were placed on the shore. So one can see in this slide that this is a open mason kind of a work. One cannot see any mortar used in this. This is open joint method. That is, whenever there is a construction, there has to be a bonding agent. In case of whatever fort we see, lime mortar is used. Some kind of a bonding agent has to be used. In Sindhudurg, they have used lead, molten lead. They have used to join 2 stones. But whereas in case of Khanderi, there is no mortar used. Huge boulders are set in a typical way. Instead of placing them longitudinally, they are placed horizontally, and there is a gap of minimum 2 inches left in the lower 2 portions of the fortification, and each stone is given a concave shape. So whenever there is some water force or due to tide, when there is water, it just seeps in and seeps out. But whatever the dressing material is, while the stone was dressed, that material is chipped in between, and the fortification was done. Why was it done so? Because while construction in those times, there used to be lime mortar used, and lime mortar required a lot of time to set, whereas the entire day there was a fight going on. So these workers over there, they chiseled the stone, and during night they placed each layer. So in this fashion, they have constructed the entire fort. So entire fort is living on a self-made technique. There is no mortar as such, and it has been there since last 350 years without any kind of a reconstruction or restoration work. You can see it here. Another fort is Kulaba Fort. Kulaba Fort is the last fort constructed by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. The construction began in 1652, just 2 kilometers away from Alibag. This is quite a tourist destination nowadays. because a lot of people come over here for a one-day picnic. So there is this tourist destination. During Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre's era, this fort acted as a prominent naval base as well as the capital of Maratha naval fleet in western Konkan. See, this side is along the Alibag coast, western side of the fort, whereas the eastern side is along the sea. One can see that uh, there is a space left between sea and the island, main island, and fort is on another side. During high tide, this is a water fort surrounded by water. And during low tide, one can walk around or take a tanga to this fort. This has played a snub to British as well as Portuguese navies altogether. This is the only place in world where combined forces of British and Portuguese were defeated by Kanhoji Angre. They claim to be the naval supreme powers, but even their combined forces were defeated by Kanhoji Angre at this fort. This is the aerial view of the Colaba fort. This is towards Alibag where the water is, and this is during high tide even. You can see there is stone, so there is no bombarding from this eastern side of the wall. So fortification is here, and no British ship can bombard from this end because this distance is quite high. Third most important fort was Suvarnadurg. It was built by Bijapur kings in the 17th century. It was later on captured and strengthened by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. In Kanhoji's life, this fort plays a vital role. He was born in Suvarnadurg. He began his career as seaman from here. His father was Nayab Subedar, Nayab Killedar of Suvarnadurg. And it was Kanhoji who captured the Killedar of this fort, thinking that he was not loyal to Chhatrapati anymore, and he had some treaty with Siddhis, and he was to hand over the fort to Siddhi. And when Kanhoji realized that, he caught that Killedar, put him in jail, and sent a message to Satara at Kolhapur to Tararani that I have arrested the Killedar as he was changing his sides, and now you give me the orders what is to be done. Tararani obviously told him, whatever best decision you could take, you take it. Rajaram Maharaj is in Jinji, and this was the beginning of Kanhoji era from Suvarnadurg. This slide shows the Gibraltar of the East, the mighty fort of Marathas, Vijayadurg. Vijayadurg is supposed to be a mighty fort, or it's the epitome of Maratha powers in the western region. In this picture, one cannot see the might of the fort. One has to feel that fort on site itself. There is a very old painting. My cursor is on that. This is an old painting of Vijayadurg, and this is the recent picture. Vijayadurg is the oldest fort in Konkan, built in 1193, was Raja Bhoj II. It is known as Gibraltar of the East in various historical documents. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj took over this fort and extended the fortification fourfold. It had just one line of fortification, whereas Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj added 3 lines to it. It is said to be having a underwater fortification. It is basically not man-made. It is natural fortification around 150 meters away from the fort itself. So if any foreign ship or if any invading ship comes close by, not knowing the terrain, it breaks down. And this fort is very strategically placed. It is situated at the beginning of Baghotan Creek, that is around 40 kilometers long. So Marathas who were able to sail in shallow waters could pull their ships along deep in the creek, and chasing forces of Britishers or Portuguese, once they entered this creek, Maratha would lock the creek mouth with another set of their set of naval ships, and these two troops, they would invariably sandwich the enemy and grill it to the core. So this is biggest Maratha naval base in southern Konkan. These are the two types of ships. One is Gurab. One can see that there are 4 to 5 masts on this Gurab, whereas Galvit, it had only one. So Galvit had a capacity of say 150 to 200 tons, and Gurab and Pal were the biggest ships with a carriage capacity of 350 to 400 tons at a time. Here is the comparison of contemporary era and ships. This small ship, one can see, is a Maratha Galvit. This is a Gurab, and this is a British ship. So one can see the comparison. Those tiny ships and attacking Britishers in numbers. So numbers played a important role in Maratha warfare, and they knew the timing, they knew the tides very well, and they knew the currents very well. So while attacking Indian these Britishers or Portuguese ships, they attacked them in numbers, and in one-to-one fight, Marathas were much superior to British or Portuguese. Now, various communities and its role. When we say of Maratha Navy or Kanhoji's Navy, it was not just Maratha Navy. Koli, Agri, Bhandari, Mali, Kharvi, Dadli, these all are Konkani communities. And each community has its own character. Like Agri. Agri are the people who were busy in salt pan. They were salt pan workers. Kolis are fishermen community. Bhandaris are again local communities. So they were very much familiar with the terrain. So they could fight Britishers in much better way. Like to counter better gunpowder of Britishers, Agris and Kolis were employed on one-to-one fight on sea, because they have a proximity to sea every time, and they can gel with the glare of sunshine. So they were able to see in a better way than a conventional other people like us. We can have glare over the sea during light, but these were much better people in doing that job. So various communities were used. Like when we say today that there were caste systems and all, but these various castes and communities work all together for a noble cause. During Kanhoji's time and even today, Janmashtami, Dasra, and ship race are a customary things, traditions today. And one very important part or very interesting part is Malkham in Konkan. Malkham, as we know, is a pole and a sort of exercise. It is only in Konkan that there are Malkhams of 12 feet to 18 feet height, whereas everywhere else you will find Malkhams in 6 to 9 feet height. 15 to 18 feet is the height of mast in ship. So during Kanhoji's time, a Malkham was mandatory. A good Malkham player used to climb up, cut the ropes of a British or Portuguese ship or a Siddhi ship from the pulley, and pull the mast down. And then once the speed came down, Marathas would conquer that ship or fight that ship in one-to-one battle. So that is the reason why Konkan has got these high Malkhams. So this gives a very vital or important aspect of Konkan or Kanhoji Angre, that using his minimum resources and optimizing their services and utilizing them in the best possible ways, he could rule and he could conquer the best of uh, powers of his era. So here I conclude that this was a slight glimpse I could give you about Kanhoji Angre and his Konkan. So should if
Yeah,
anything else to be asked.
thank you for that very interesting talk. So, a couple of questions, a couple of comments. Um, so, first off, Girish Naik loves your mustache.
Thank
And
you.
his question was, your opening slide says that Kanhoji's descendants kept the Peshwa at bay. So they were presumably on, different sides after Chhatrapati Shivaji Raje. Uh, Shinil Payamal replied to Girish, referring to one of Dr. Uday Kulkarni's books on the issues between the Peshwa and the Angre. But what's your take on this issue?
See, there are certain very controversial comments, like why I said Peshwas at bay. Basically, Peshwas and Angre belong to the same area. Balaji Vishwanath and Kanhoji were very good pals, childhood friends. During Bajirao also, there were very cordial relationships. But after Kanhoji's son and Nana Sahib Peshwa, there were interest of clashes of interest in this region. Peshwas being Chatpavan Brahmins of that time and uh, ranked up higher in Pune Darbar, power center were changed. So there was a tussle of fight, whereas Kanhoji and his children, they thought that they have been here since ages and they have ruled this area and they have preserved this area from Britishers. It was their natural right. And they took Chhatrapati as their masters instead of Peshwas. So there was always conflict of interest.
Okay. So, a couple of observations. Maria Lobo observed that British rule was technically 1857 to 1947, 90 years, not 150 years. Earlier, it was a private enterprise, the East India Company. That's what she points out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's also a interesting side conversation between Kushal Bhatkar and Sabira Fernandez on whether Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj actually visited Bombay or not, specifically around Sri Gundi. Kushal observed that James Douglas, who you referred to, in fact, mentions in his book, a book on Bombay, that the Maratha Armar actually arrived at Back Bay, led by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, to visit Sri Gundi at Balkeshwar. His question, though, is what was, in your opinion, the importance of Bombay during Kanhoji Angre's time, apart from it being a British stronghold, if you're able to answer that?
I'll try to answer it the other way. Bombay, as what we know today, is a reclaimed land. During that time, it was a group of islands. So entire Bombay was never again under Britishers at that time even. In Mazgaon, Siddhi was there. So Britishers knew the value of Bombay, but the entire Bombay was not with them during that time even.
Okay. Tony Nixon asks whether Angre's Navy ships were essentially developed from local fishing boat designs.
To some extent, yes. And the other way, if we say, there were 14 different kind of ships made by Marathas, whether it is Galvat, Gurab, Firang, Sangmari, Fatehmari. So they were basically a what do you call a copy or a hybrid of British and Indian, British and Portuguese and Indian kind of a. There was a technology exchange kind of a thing. Whenever there was a Portuguese boat or British boat confiscated, Marathas learned from it, checked its joinery and all, and according to their needs, they made the boats. They were never a blue water navy. So they made boats according to their requirements.
Okay. Another question from Tony. When was the treaty between Shahu and Kanhoji made?
I have that day, but right now I don't have it with me.
Okay.
I should not say anything
Yeah.
vague. Exactly.
Prathamesh, no problem. So Prathamesh Ekar, any question, any information about the European ships confiscated by Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre?
Yes. There were a number of ships confiscated by Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre, and basically they were confiscated uh, for his dastak. So there was a rule. Whenever Kanhoji and his successors confiscated a boat or confiscated a ship, whatever the tax liability was, once that paid, the boat and goods were returned, but not the arm and ammunition, because Marathas were always at the scarcity of arm and ammunition. So they never returned the arm and ammunition. Whatever gun, swords, whatever they got, they kept it.
So a couple of comments here. Vinita says, thanks, very informative and interesting. Manisha Tadim says, thank you for the enlightening talk. Adil Desai, very interesting to know about the Malkham height in Konkan with respect to the masts of a ship. Mohini says, brilliant insight into Shivaji's Armada. Thank you. Dr. Alhad Kothari, would you let us know how many generations have passed between you and Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre?
I am the 9th descendant.
Ronak Rantik says, thank you for the great insights. I wanted to know, are there any book recommendations to read more about the Maratha Navy?
Yeah, there are many books, but unfortunately, most of them are either in Marathi or very few of them are in English. So Kulapkar Angre Sarkhel, Angre Kali Nashkagar is there. There are many books, but they are basically in Marathi.
Okay. Maria Lobo says, thank you for sharing your knowledge. You can see you're very passionate about your subject. Question from Adil Desai, why did the Murud Janjira fort remain unconquered for such a long time?
This is a controversial statement. Like Siddhi, if we take map of western coast, Siddhi's territory started right from Khanderi. So a fort next to Khanderi is Underi, which was owned by Siddhi, which was ruled by Siddhi. And in today's times, Thal Vaishet, where the RCF plant is, that area, that was the region Siddhi ruled. From there to 55 kilometers is the distance between Thal and Murud. This area was ruled by Murud Janjira Siddhi. Marathas drove him out of the entire region, and Siddhi was limited to Murud Janjira itself. So he lost almost 50 kilometers on each side of Murud Janjira. It was the only fort which was his saving grace. And had it been Sambhaji Maharaj and not being caught and killed, Murud was not a big task.
So Yogiraj says, very nice session. Vasant Sansgiri, for me, it was blue-blooded history. Speaking about history, clearly Shivaji's strategy was guerrilla warfare at sea. Rajesh says, very good insight in the evolution of Maratha Navy under Shivaji Maharaj and Sarkhel Kanhojira's confusion. Question from Nikunj, did Marathas have a kartal system like the ones that the Portuguese had?
Yes, they called it dastak. That was the pass. Like Portuguese had kartas, Britishers had pass, and Marathas had dastak.
Okay. Prathamesh asks, can you tell us more about Angre's connection with Alibag and the tomb behind Rameshwar temple in Chaul, which believed to belong to someone from the Angre family?
That is supposed to be a one-to-one replica of Sarkhel Kanhojiraje Angre's Samadhi at Alibag.
Commander Mohan Narayanan says, your premise that ships entering Bombay had to first touch Khanderi Island and then proceed to Bombay is perhaps not supported by historical evidence. whatever watchdog facilities are prevalent on the island was nullified by the Siddhis occupying the adjoining island in Andheri. More an observation than a question.
He
Well,
may be the right person. Basically, that is the channel. That is the channel. See, today, in today's context, forts are most irrelevant because there is navigation, there are lot many things. But whereas in case of brown water navy, for everything they were dependent on the coastline, even for drinking water. So every ship had to enter through and via Khanderi Island. That is why there is a lighthouse even. Later on, when Britishers captured it, they had this constructed this island over lighthouse there.
Okay. I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly on some of the questions. There are more questions piling up. So did they ever use the conquered ships against the British or the Portuguese? Is Avin's question.
Yes.
Vidya Heble makes an observation, very informative talk. Thank you. I've been trying to get the Thane Municipal Corporation to name the Kalwa Bridge Naka after Kanhoji Angre. I think the old name of the chowk was Kanhoji Angre Chowk, but I saw his name on the bus stop. Because I saw the name of the bus stop there some years ago. This is what prompted me to find out more about him. Currently, is there any Angre ship available to witness?
No. Unfortunately, 1756 was the last thing.
Okay. Commander Mohan Narayanan's question is, what were the reasons for the Maratha debacle at Vijayadurg in 1756?
Supremacy war. Ego tussles. That's it.
Observation of Manisha, I think there's a statue of Kanhoji Angre at Bhagwati Fort in Ratnagiri.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Alad asked a question, can something concrete be done to develop these forts guarding West Coast, i.e. Konkan as a tourist place? Very interesting, insightful presentation indeed. Thanks for this. I joined a bit late, so if this was covered earlier, then I apologize. What were the naval ranks in the Maratha Navy?
There were Subedars, Sir Subedars, Tandels, and Sarkhels, obviously, Savai Sarkhels. So there were different ranks.
And I'll take a final question here from Rajesh. Why did the Maratha Navy hold sway or control over Vasai, Sopara, and ports in Thane?
Yes, obviously. Maratha ships at the Battle of Vasai, when Chimaji Appa was coming from land side, Manaji Angre, Kanhoji's son, was holding the ground from seaside. So they stopped the chain and supply was obstructed, and that's why Vasai is lost. Vasai was lost by Portuguese.
Okay. One final question, which I will use up my privilege in asking this one. Why were Indian empires so poor at developing naval power before Angre?
Lack of feeling that this is a nation. We always have this feeling that whenever we go to Bagha border or Atari border, we say that we are on border. But why don't we have, as a common man, why don't we have that feeling when we are on Marine Drive? We are also on border. That is why Kasab could enter Badwar Pass.
Sorry, one last question I will take from Tony. Can you say more about the Savants and their importance to the Navy?
See, Savants were basically a very small state. So it hardly mattered. They were good at, they were stationed at Savantwadi, but their coexistence depended upon Portuguese supremacy. So they could not enter into conflict with Portuguese. They are very close to Portuguese in Goa.
Well, I think that's about the time we have. Thank you for a wonderful talk, Raghujiraje Sahib. It was very interesting. And thanks to everyone else for attending. Look forward to seeing you on more such talks in the future. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.